Welcome back. So, moving on to the last one for test 2. We are currently on chapter 8. So this chapter focuses on cognition, language, and intelligence. And one of the things one of my previous textbooks did that I really liked was it talks about the pluses and kind of pros and cons of technology. And that's kind of how this one starts out. It starts talking about cognition. So cognition is the way in which information is processed and manipulated in remembering, thinking, and knowing. So, good way to think about this is your 9 times tables. For some people, they learned that you go through the 9 timetables and that midway through it changes, and that you can just kind of memorize and plug different numbers in different spaces, and boom, you had your 9 multiplication tables. For me, I actually memorized it just like I did all of the others. But for some people, there's that kind of like learning trick. It's kind of how cognition works. It's kind of how you learn things. It's what you think of whenever you think of these concepts. Kind of, I'm not gonna lie, it's really abstract. But the way you know information, the way that you think about it, the way you recall it, the way you explain it to others, all of that is part of knowing and cognition. Thinking is kind of cognition with a purpose. This book didn't really talk about that as much. The process of manipulating information mentally by forming concepts, solving problems, making decisions, and reflecting critically or creatively. Again, you're trying to reach a goal. You're trying to accomplish something with that. It's not like you're just recalling information for the fun of it. You're doing it to help someone or to fix a problem, or there's a purpose to it that isn't present with cognition. And that's important because I am going to ask about that difference on the test. So that's something that's good to know. Probably, I'm guessing, I don't know, maybe the way I'll do it is asking that maybe somebody's trying to do a budget or something like that, and they're using math and some of the mathematical concepts that they know. That may be part of their cognition. But the way that they use those mathematical skills and concepts in order to form a budget, that is more thinking. Hopefully that kind of explains the difference. You may know your multiplication tables. You may know, variables. You may know real and imaginary numbers. But the way you apply that to real life and how that helps solve problems, all of that is more thinking than cognition. Concepts, mental categories that are used to group objects, events, and characteristics. So if I ask you, B, F, N, P, L, T, what do all those things have in common? What are those things? Most people will probably say, oh, those are letters. Letters are a concept. It is a graphical representation that we have of a sound that we group together to make words. Okay, it's a concept. Can't really see concepts, can't touch them. These are things that we kind of make up. And it's a way that we organize and categorize this information. So that's what concepts are. Now, decision making. Decision making is exactly what it says. But I want to move to 256 real quick and talk about the actual definition of it. The mental activity of evaluating alternatives and choosing among them. So, once upon a time, you had to decide where you wanted to go to college. Congratulations, you chose DCC. I hope you're not regretting this choice, and I hope you found it to be a pleasurable experience so far. But what went into making that decision? Was it finances? Was it geography? Was it the available academic programs? All of these things are things to consider whenever you make a decision. It's the same thing whenever you are moving. Maybe you're trying to figure out what apartment complex to move into, or maybe you're trying to decide between houses that you want to buy. There are a lot of different factors that go into that, and that's why the kind of evaluating alternatives part of that is very important, because one house may have a lot of things that you really like, but if it's $50,000 more expensive than another house that you like, how much do you really like those extra perks and features? Is that backsplash worth $50,000? Doubtful. And that's where decision making comes in. You have to kind of weigh pros and cons, things like that. And that kind of goes back to the AI thing that they were talking about. I posted an article in one of the earlier lectures where it's talking about like a certain percentage of people are willing to date an android or a robot. And it's like, what would factor in someone's decision to do that? I would think a rather horrible relationship past if you're at that point, but hey, what do I know? But people make decisions all the time, and this is part of how they do it. What's good for me, what's good for other people that I care about, what fits in with my values, what do I want, what's my ultimate goal, etc., etc. So that part's decision making, and again, that's on page 256. I'm still on the second slide here, but I did jump forward a little bit for that, so I want to make sure you knew that. Going on with concepts, you have two types of concepts. One is a formal concept. This is very concrete. Mental representations of categories that are created through rigid and logical rules or features. So, like an element. An element is a substance that cannot be broken down into simpler substances, barring subatomic particles. That is the rule. That is kind of going back to implicit and explicit memory. That is very explicit. It's a very general knowledge thing. It is a very that does not vary from person to person. That is not their individual experience. This is a universal rule of how these things work. And because of that, because it tends to be fact, that is something that is formal. You know, how many letters there are in the alphabet. That is a very concrete thing. That is not really open to interpretation, and that does not vary from person to person and from experience to experience. So because of that, that's a formal concept. Now, natural concepts are a little bit more abstract. They are more open to interpretation. They are mental representations of categories resulting from experiences in daily life. They do not have fixed or defined features. So, in the PowerPoint, I use the example of a mother or father. That means different things to different people, because if you had a stepmother or a stepfather, that's going to influence your role or your concept of a mother or father. Another one may be a monster. If you sit there and you ask a 50-year-old to draw a picture of a monster, that's going to look very different than maybe the way a 5-year-old draws a monster. It's going to vary from person to person. It is not a universally accepted fact. It is experience dependent. So, you know, you can kind of go along with it with that. Prototypes or prototype model, the ideal or most representative sample of a natural concept. It helps us categorize or identify a member of a concept. So one of the things that we talked about before in the past, I think, was talking about Jungian archetypes. Archetypes and prototypes are somewhat similar in that this is a kind of representative of this idea. So whenever you see a dark, cloaked, hooded, shrouded character in a dark alleyway, you know, that is a representative sample of a threat. That is something our brain kind of says, danger, Will Robinson, danger. Our spidey sense tingles, whatever you want to call it. Whatever your thing is, that's how your mind classifies it as a threat, and it's because it meets a certain criteria, and that's a prototype. So conversely, going back to natural concepts, what you think of whenever you think of a mother. You know, the way that they look, what you expect them to do, certain roles and expectations that they fulfill. That's all part of prototypes. So, problem solving, sorry about that. The mental process of finding an appropriate way to achieve a goal. So, first you find and frame the problem. What exactly is the problem? For me, one of my big problems whenever I was where you are was math. I know this is hugely surprising, and it's like I've never told you this information before. But I was always horrible in math. Did a really bad job of it. I just never did well with it. So I found and I framed my problem. Especially whenever I got to TCC, I'm like, look, I know I'm bad at math. How much more do I have to do so that I can get this over with? And that helped me frame my problem. I only had to take 2 more math courses. That was less than a year of math. So that helped give me a finite time frame to know that I'm not going to have to put up with it that much longer. And then I went on to finding good problem-solving strategies. I looked at the resources that I had available. Who did I know that was good in math? What were my teachers like? Were they willing to help me? Did they actually keep their office hours? Things like that. And that helped me say, okay, well, after class, I'm going to go talk to the professor for this amount of time, and then I'm going to do this much practice work, and then I'm going to go to the math center, because at that point we had a math center. And, you know, that way I was able to maximize my resources in order to help solve those strategies. So evaluating solutions. Would I love to be a math person? Absolutely. Am I? No. So that is not a feasible solution for me. So, because I could not change that I was that type of person, what I could do was change the amount of time and effort that I put in. And that was the only manageable solution that I had at the time. It was either that or give up on college, which I wasn't willing to do. So because of that, I knew I had to work harder, and it was not fun. It was not easy, but it was something that I had to do. And because I'd already found and framed my problem, I knew I only had to do it for a year. So that was a little bit of encouragement that kept me going. Rethink and redefine problems and solution over time. So that worked for me then. And it was feasible for me then. Had I chosen a different career path, it may not have been feasible, because that took a lot out of me. It did take a lot of really hard work and a lot of time. And, you know, I probably would have needed to reconsider a different option, because I probably, at the time I was working and doing school, I would not have been able to keep that up. If I were trying to do something like physics or something like that for the rest of my life, I would have needed to be able to concentrate more and eventually develop those skills. But at the time, that was not possible. It was not feasible, and I was not going to do it. So, you know, good problem-solving strategies. Maybe, I'm trying to think of like another problem that one may have. And by all means, if you think of problems that you have and you want to group think this whole problem-solving solution model framework thing, we can definitely do that. Feel free to post up in a discussion, and we can go through and we can talk about some possible solutions and strategies and problem solve, if you're willing to do that. A lot of people not really comfortable with it though. But that is always an option. And I challenge you, use this framework, use this kind of rubric thing, and try it with a problem that you may have. Maybe you have a really crappy roommate. So find and frame your problems. Okay, well, are they a bad person? Are they just a bad roommate? Do you not like living with them? Are they a slob? You know, what exactly is the problem? Maybe they're a good person, but they're just messy. Okay? So find and frame your problem. You don't want to be like, oh my gosh, this person's horrible and I never want to live with them again. No, that puts a kind of negative connotation on the experience. But what you can say is, I have a messy roommate. And then you develop good problem solving strategies. So maybe leaving a little sticky note saying, hey, can you clean this up? Or maybe texting and be like, hey, having friends over, do you mind doing the dishes? Maybe they just need that little push, that little reminder. And evaluate solutions. What worked most effectively? If you did a to-do list and put it on the fridge, did that work for them? Did it work better than sending them a text and asking them to do random things during the day? Did the little sticky notes work? Maybe you have to bribe them. Be like, hey, if you clean the dishes, I'll cook dinner tonight. Something like that. And then as time goes on, you may not have to do those things. Or maybe the problem gets worse and you have to do more. You don't know. But that kind of being open to reevaluating and revisiting solutions, that's an important part of the process. So sub-goals, talking a little bit about that. Intermediate goals or intermediate problems devised to put the individual in a better position for reaching the final goal or solution. You're already doing it. This class is probably a sub-goal for a lot of you. This is a stepping stone. You have your ultimate career path that you want to get to, and this is just one little thing that you have to do, one little check mark, one little checkbox that you have to check off before you get to go to nursing school or before you get to go to university. You know, whatever it is, this is a sub goal. This is not the end all be all. It's not like, oh, I'm going to take this one psychology class and then I'm going to be done. Now, most of you are well on your way to AAs or bachelor's degrees or whatever it is that you're on the way to. And that's why this is a sub-goal. Algorithms, most of the time these include formulas. So one of the big ones that we like to use here in Tallahassee, hopefully I didn't miss anything out. So sales tax in Tallahassee is 7.5%. What is it? Why is this important, you ask? Because if you go to a restaurant, you look at your tax and you multiply it by 2, that gives you 15% of your bill, which is what most people consider a decent tip. I think most people try and go for 20% now, but you know, once upon a time. Because you're using math, because you're using a formula, that's considered an algorithm. So anytime you look at numbers or strategies, formulas, things like that, that's an algorithm. Now, a heuristic is a little bit different. A heuristic is a shortcut or strategy or guidelines. This is not a guaranteed answer. So a lot of times whenever you apply logic, this is a heuristic. So a lot of times there are like problems, like math problems or like word problems on Facebook or something like that. It's like, Mark is half the age of Jane, and Jane is double the age of Angie. How old is Mark? I don't know. The way that you kind of figure that out, that's a heuristic. They don't give you a number, so it's not an algorithm, but you can kind of work with it and apply some logic to help you get an idea. Science is a lot like this. One of the things that I talked to you about with behaviorism, one criticism of behaviorism, is that it's overly dependent on animal research. Well, rats and humans are actually a pretty good bit alike. So because of that, they use a heuristic that if it holds true in rats, it's probably going to hold true in humans. So it's a shortcut or a strategy. You know, it's something that we see in a very similar species, so we expect to see it in a larger species or sample. Hopefully that makes sense. Reasoning. I included a little bit from Sherlock, and one of the reasons why I included this particular bit was because it included inductive and deductive reasoning. So from inductive reasoning, you can reason from specific observations to make generalizations. Whenever Sherlock sees Watson for the first time, he says, the haircut, the way you hold yourself, you're obviously military. Now, it can go both ways here, but there are very specific observations that he's making that lead him to conclude something more generalized. Versus reasoning from a general case that is known to be true to a specific instance, which is deductive reasoning. You're wounded in Afghanistan, you have a suntan, but not above your wrist. So these are very general things that most people who are in Afghanistan or Iraq have suntans. And because of that, he generalizes to this specific event. This is another one of these things. You can think yourself into oblivion. I'm probably not going to be that specific about it. Whenever it comes to the test, I will probably ask one or the other very specifically. I don't know which one yet, but as time comes, which will probably be later on tonight, I will let you know. But inductive and deductive reasoning, you start with a broad kind of sense of knowledge and work down to something very specific, or you notice something very specific and generalize all the way up to a more generalized kind of deduction or observation. Let me be careful in how I use that to not confuse people, including myself. Going on with that, going on to heuristics. Yes, more on heuristics. Where did it go? Here we go. No, just kidding. I think actually Oh no, I think I skipped it. All right, so the availability heuristic, going along with that. Except I can't find it, and that's important. So, let me consult here. I apologize. There we go. I like TikTok draws, TikTok. 259. Sorry about that. Okay, so I had not gone far enough. A prediction about the probability of an event based on ease of recalling or imagining similar events. So, you know that this is something, or you think that this is something that is likely to happen because it has happened recently. So for me, I had a relay that stuck on my car. And what this meant was that there was a fan that cooled down the engine and it got stuck. Whenever it got stuck, it drained my battery. So whenever I went to leave one morning, it would not start. Okay? This is not something that I would usually think about. However, if I go to start my car one day and it does not start, the fact that this has happened to me recently is going to say, hey, check and see if that relay got stuck again. Why? Because it is something that had happened recently. One of the things that kind of goes along with this is sorry, I'm debating with myself about whether to actually say this or not, but I guess because I've kind of said that I was debating it, I guess I'm going to bring it up now. Obviously, you guys know about Parkland, the shooting that happened last week. Lots of times in the past, schools would shut down. They would get bomb threats or things like that. And back in my day, which seems like a horribly long time ago, but really wasn't, we kind of blew those things off. We did not take them very seriously because whenever I was in high school, there had really only been one school shooting, and that was Columbine. So more often than not, whenever we got things like that, we did not take those threats very seriously. Now, because the frequency of these things have gone up, we obviously take them a lot more seriously than we used to. And it's because of the availability heuristic. How many school shootings can you think of in the past 5 years? For me now, I can think of a lot more of them now than I could whenever I was in high school. Does that mean that the frequency of them have gone up? Maybe, maybe not, but the knowledge of them have definitely gone up. And because of that, that affects the availability heuristic. Going along with that, by the way, page 258 has a really awesome graph that kind of goes along with this. Representativeness heuristic, the tendency to make judgments about group membership based on physical appearances or one stereotype of a group. Have a picture of kind of a biker looking guy. You know, he's got the long beard, he's got the tattoos, he's got the leather vest. Everybody's like, oh, he's a biker. You don't know that. Maybe he's never ridden a bike in his life. I tend to think this guy has because, again, representativeness heuristic, but maybe not. I don't know. But because of his outward appearance, we assume that he belongs to a particular group. This was really big in high school, where if you dressed a certain way, you automatically had to belong to a social group. If you wore skinny jeans, and you were automatically in with a certain crowd, whereas if you wore, boat shoes, you belonged to another group. If you wore basketball shorts, then people kind of probably assumed that you were an athlete. Not necessarily true on any of these accounts, but it's very easy for us to organize our information mentally that way. So we do. Biases and barriers to problem solving. Functional fixedness. So, really cool little video on YouTube about that, about how we expect to use things in certain ways. One thing that I challenge you with that, think about mason jars. I think it was like 80% of weddings or something featured mason jars in the past year. Originally, those things were used for canning. You stored food in them, and now people are making toothbrush holders out of them and storing flowers, and they don't serve the original purpose. But functional fixedness, you can only see the use of that object in one particular way. A ruler, for example. Functional fixedness would say, oh, that is a tool for measurement. Well, depending on your parents' parenting style, that could have also been, used for a spanking. That could have also, Catholic schools, they'll kind of like wrap your knuckles with a ruler. They're not big on functional fixedness. They're very creative with the way that they use those things. Anybody that has experience with chakras knows what I'm talking about. Functional fixedness, things are not always necessarily used for their intended purpose. Confirmation bias. We have a certain set of beliefs. And whether we realize it or not, we look for information that reinforces those beliefs. And that's what the confirmation bias is. We look for evidence that tells us and tells others that we are right. So, if I say, for example, there are a lot of people now who believe in the flat earth theory. They're going to go through and look for evidence to support their theory that the earth is flat. Whereas most other people will find evidence that the earth is round. Confirmation bias is that you are looking for evidence that supports your claims and overlooking evidence that proves you wrong. Your hindsight bias is kind of your I told you so. The tendency to report after the fact that one accurately predicted an outcome. So I told you that was going to happen, or I knew you two were going to break up, things like that. I saw it coming. I told you this was going to happen. Great, it still happened, thanks. That's your hindsight bias. Mindfulness and creativity, I put a couple little things. One is an article about the state of being mindfulness and meditation. These things kind of go along with each other. I also included a little video from an app called Headspace. Headspace is a free app that you can get on your phone, and what it is actually the guy from the video gives you a guided meditation, and it helps you, in theory, focus on your mindfulness. So it's not to not think about something, it is that you can think of something and let it go, not becoming fixated on something in particular. On to the really fun stuff, and I think I'm the only person that actually thinks this is fun, but that's okay. For any of you guys that will be working in education, this is going to be a big deal to you, and I promise you, you will not see the last of this. Anybody that's a psychology major, anybody that wants to be a counselor, you're going to see this again, I promise you, okay? Talking about intelligence testing. The Terman test, I think it was Terman, don't quote me on that. Anyway, intelligence testing began with the French government, and what they wanted to do was with the people that they were recruiting for the military, or that was kind of the American usage of it. For the French, they wanted to identify people that were having problems learning in the classroom. For the American military, we decided to recruit intelligence testing to decide what job people would be good at whenever we recruited them in. So, Alfred Binet constructed the first assessment of intelligence. I can almost promise you, you're going to see that on the test. I can almost promise you. Alfred Binet, again, he was French, but he was one of the first, and he was very instrumental in not only coming up with intelligence testing, but also being able to generalize testing into daily utility. So what it's actually good for. Currently, the Stanford Binet is one of the more popular intelligence tests. There's Lewis Terman. It's currently in its 5th edition. Why it's called the Stanford Binet whenever he developed with Lewis Terman, I don't know why, but that is. And it assesses a verbal and nonverbal intelligence. So the way that they do that is you will kind of have an objective type test where, you have to pick a certain answer, but it will also have like diagrams and puzzles and things like that where you have to complete diagrams or complete pictures or things like that to assess your nonverbal intelligence. It's more visuospatial. And it's a pretty interesting little thing. Wechsler scales. This is another really important, very useful intelligence test. Wechsler scales are actually divided according by age. You have the WAIS, which is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scales, and then you have the WISC, which is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, and then you have the WIPSI, which was my favorite, Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale of Intelligence. And if you're interested, you can go onto Wechsler's site. Also PAR, which is like a website where you can buy certain psychological examinations, stuff like that, and it will tell you, okay, this is for use with ages, I think for the WAIS it's either 16 or 17 and above. WISC is between, I want to say, like 7 to 17 or 16, whatever it is, and then the WIPSI is for like ages like 4 or 5 up to wherever the WISC starts. But it's pretty interesting the way that those things are brought about. It is worthy to note too, all of these have different psychometric properties. You're like, Dross, what does that even mean? Well, if you go to the next slide, it actually helps. So you have 2 main psychometric properties that you're looking at. One is validity and one is reliability. Validity is your ability to make your mark. Are you actually assessing what you claim to be testing? So if I'm looking for intelligence, well, what is intelligence? Is it how much knowledge that you have? Is it one's ability to learn? Is it one's ability to perform on a test? What defines these things? Luckily, this is not my job, but somebody out there, mainly the people that cultivate and develop these tests, they have ways of actually assessing, okay, this actually assesses intelligence. But here's the thing with validity. Sometimes you're not always assessing what you claim to be assessing. For example, if I give you an intelligence test in Arabic, I don't know how many people in here speak Arabic, maybe a few, but especially if Arabic is not your first language, am I genuinely assessing your intelligence, or am I testing your knowledge of the Arabic language? So this is why we talk about culture fair intelligence test, which if you look on page 266, that's actually kind of helpful. You have to ask somebody, if they speak more than one language, what language do you want this test in? What's your native language? Is that the one that you want it in? Things like that. Because you have to make sure you're actually assessing what you claim to be assessing. Personality tests. This is another one. You're like, oh, well, what kind of personality do you have? Well, are you looking at thoughts or feelings, or are you looking at actions? And that's what validity looks at. Now, reliability is your ability to reproduce an answer. So, if I give you an intelligence test, you may get an answer wrong every single time. But that counts for something in the psychological world. That is reliability. Reliability does not always mean good. Reliability means consistency. The ability of an assessment to provide consistent, reproducible results. You can be consistently wrong, but still that is ability to produce the same answer every time, that is something that psychologists look for. Now, if you get an assessment that is both valid and reliable, you've kind of hit the gold mine here, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. So hopefully you kind of understand. I can promise you're going to see that too. Validity and reliability, you're going to see that. And I mean, almost verbatim. The assessing what a test intends to measure is that reliability, validity, science, or luck. I don't know. I'll make something up. But you'll see it in that form. Okay? Versus a test's ability to produce reproducible results, or consistency within testing. That is reliability. So hopefully that makes sense. Mental age, that goes along with, obviously we know people that they may be a certain age chronologically, but maybe they don't fit that mental age. Maybe, and think about too, developmental disabilities, things like that. You know, we may know somebody who's an adult, but maybe they can't function like an adult because of developmental disabilities. Their mental age is something that you assess for in terms of their knowledge, their level of independence, things like that. It's kind of a reflection of the mind's capabilities. It's not by any means the verbatim definition, but, you know, still something to know. Going along with that, standardization. Standardization is a big deal because just like whenever you take FCAT or whatever it is you take, SAT, ACT, imagine you go in to take the SAT and a fire alarm goes off. How do you think that's going to influence your results? Probably a lot, right? The SAT is a standardized test. And they want individual administrations to be as uniform as possible in order to make sure that all of those tests perform or live up to a standard. Because you don't want somebody to say, oh, well, I did really bad because there was a fire drill that day. No. You're trying to eliminate those variables, and that's why standardization is so important. That's why whenever you go in there, today you will be taking the standard achievement test. Please put away all, you know, they roll on the monotone thing, and they do that on purpose because they don't want each case to be different, because individual differences in administration can produce somewhat different test results. Hopefully that makes sense. The actual definition of mental age: an individual's level of mental development relative to that of others. So if you are 17, how well do you achieve in academics according to the rest of the 17-year-olds? How much knowledge do you have in comparison to the rest of the 17-year-olds? That's what mental age is. Human intelligence, gifted. Talks a little bit about that. That is on page 269. You're looking at an IQ of 130 or higher. I can tell you right now, I had a professor who talks about how actually prevalent giftedness is in kids, and how a lot of times ADHD or behavioral issues will present as a symptom of gifted, because they are not as intellectually stimulated, thereby have less impulse control and will cause more behavioral disruption, stuff like that. Is it true? Maybe, maybe not, but it's pretty interesting. Highly intelligent, again, defined of an IQ of 130 or above. It's interesting because I have a brother who is very, very intelligent, and I have a sister who is a nurse. And my brother never studied a day in his life. Made it through high school with no problems, decided not to attend college, and now he travels the world. We call him Jesus because he's got this long beard and this long hair, and he's a nomad, kind of travels the world. But incredibly bright, incredibly gifted, you know, very, very intelligent. But, you know, the normal working world was not his thing. So he's a carpenter and a massage therapist, and that's what he does. He just travels the world and makes a living doing odd jobs here and there. That's what he does. My sister, who is by no means still very, very intelligent, but she was not able to perform as well academically as her brother. She had to study. But God, does that girl study. She's still studying. She's going through, she's becoming an ARNP, but she's worked for every bit of it. This is not to say that gifted means you're a success. And this is not to say that not being gifted is failure or difficulty. Typically there has to be some sort of balance. And I think those two are a very interesting display of what happens when there's no balance. Emotional intelligence, the capacity to perceive, understand, regulate, and use emotions to adapt in social situations. I'm not gonna lie, this class is incredibly challenging for me because I like to think that I'm fairly emotionally intelligent. I can look out at a room of people and see when people are falling asleep and when they're bored and when they're not entertained or when they're confused. I know the looks on people's faces, and I can recognize that and reconcile that very easily and adjust my behavior accordingly. Unfortunately, because lectures are like this, I can't do that with you guys. I can't look at you and be like, oh, I'm losing them, and then make a funny joke to try and bring you back. Can't do that. But that is something that emotionally intelligent people can do. People who are highly empathetic tend to have very high emotional intelligence. They will have been in certain situations. They can think about times when they felt like the other person was feeling. And that's a skill in and of itself. Maybe not as useful as maybe mathematical skills or something of that sort, but it is still a skill. And when working with people, it is very, very useful. If you don't believe me, watch the show The Good Doctor on ABC. Absolutely brilliant. He is a doctor who is autistic, but absolutely brilliant physician, but he has trouble relating to people. One thing that is not high is his emotional intelligence, so he's apt to say things that quickly upset people and things like that. And that's something that is prevalent throughout that disorder. So, intelligence, going along with that, Garner's multiple intelligence theories. There's a couple different theories actually on this. So, I'm looking for the textbook definition of intelligence, which maybe I'll just go through and find it this way. I feel like the index is my friend today. Or maybe not. Who does this? Okay. Let's see here. 263. Again, I apologize, I'm kind of all over the place. Intelligence is an all-purpose ability to do well on cognitive tasks, to solve problems, and learn from experience. So, what intelligence is not is book smart. That is one form of intelligence. You can have people who are not good with books at all. People who are not good students. But they may be master mechanics. They may be really, really good at problem solving. Things like that. One of the things, I saw an article the other day about apprenticeship programs in Germany. And what this does is that up until, grade, I guess what would be the equivalent of like 10th grade or so here in the US, they go to school, but then after that, if they're not set on the path to university or to college, they call it university there, they're not on the path to university, which most of them aren't actually, it's a relatively small population that go to college, even though college is free, they begin working with tradesmen or experts in a craft. Because some people do learn better by experience. Some people learn better by reading. Some people are visual learners and have to have PowerPoints. Everyone learns a little bit differently. And so intelligence is a very malleable, very individualistic concept, and it differs from person to person. Gardner's multiple intelligence theory appreciates this. So it talks about how some people are visual learners, how some people are kinesthetic learners. So for athletes, that is a form of intelligence, knowing how to move their body, knowing the Olympics are going on right now, speed skaters, how low they can get to the ground before they fall over. That's a very kinesthetic property. Logical, mathematical, those people who are math people. Existential learners, verbal linguistic, which is what I am. Words make sense to me. I told you guys that I can do metaphors and analogies, things like that, because that is the realm of intelligence that I can function in. That's something that I tend to be pretty good at. And that's what Gardner's multiple intelligence theories say, is that intelligence varies from person to person and has different domains of intelligence. Sternberg's triarchic theory suggesting that humans have varying degrees of analytical, creative, and practical abilities. So Sternberg believed in 3 separate types of intelligence. One is analytical, so being able to look at something and analyze and kind of pick it apart. Creative, so for those people who can think outside of the box. Again, functional fixedness, this is where this comes in. For some people, they see a chair and all they see is a place to sit. But for some people that are creative thinkers, they see a chair and they see a ladder. Things like that. And then practical abilities, just, little everyday things that you have to think about. Some people are really good at those things. So, language. So, language is a system for using symbols, words, gestures to think and communicate. You guys see me, I do this all the time, I speak with my hands. Phonemes are the basic building blocks of spoken language. So if you look at the word itself, phonemes, it starts with a PH. Whenever you look at that, most people know that PH can sound like an F. That's phonemes. It has to do with phonics and the pairing of languages, or the pairing of letters and the sounds that they produce as a mean of that. Phonemes focus on oral pronunciation, whereas phonics tends to associate the graphical representation, so associating that PH to an F. But then, phoneme is actually recognizing that seeing the PH sounds like F, or seeing an S and knowing S, pairing those letters and those sounds together. Morphemes is the fundamental units to bring meaning to language. So we talked about reinforcers, and I told you that enforce is to make something happen, and re means again. That's morpheme. I don't know what that word is. Anyway, it has to do with knowledge of morphemes. So pre means before. Pro means professional. Things like that. Those little kind of hints and tidbits for any of my medical people that are in here. Melanie, I'm looking at you, Melanie Horn. You guys know that pneumo has a certain meaning. Hemo means blood. All of these things are morphemes. So hopefully that makes sense. The syntax, a collection of rules concerning where to place words or phrases. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably not gonna test on that at all. Grammar, rules associated with words and sentence structure. Semantics, the rules used to bring meaning to words and sentences. So that's where the there thing comes from. The little meme on the side. Semantics, the one that I really like to focus on is pragmatics. You are not going to go in and talk to your boss the same way that you talk to your roommate, unless you just want to get fired. You have certain type of language that you can use in certain situations. You guys hear me, you hear how I speak on these lectures. Whenever I get around people and I get excited though, my speech definitely changes. I'm not as precise, I guess. my voice goes up, I start getting louder, I become a lot more Southern. And it's situational. It depends on the context. Am I having fun? Because if so, my speech is not going to be as rigid. And those are all parts of pragmatics that help us understand and organize language. Language development over the lifespan. I probably will test on this somewhat, but it'll be, again, it'll be very specific with whatever it's going to be. And it will probably be, went a little too far. Matter of fact, I can probably look at it and tell you. Probably going to be 6 to 12 month range. I'm probably going to ask you, this is the age where first words are spoken, which is between 10 and 13 months. Even though it says 6 to 12, it can vary depending on the gender and situation of the child. But those are the things that I'll probably be focusing on that. Again, hopefully the study guide will be up a little bit later on tonight, and that will help guide you further. But in the meantime, I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of information in that. I will let you know what specifically to focus on. But hopefully that'll help get you started. If you need anything, let me know.